What would you do if you suddenly saw Jesus lit up like a bright light standing next to two other dead people? How would you respond? Well, today we're going to talk about the Transfiguration of Jesus. Good morning, I'm Pastor Rini. Welcome to 747 Morning Inspiration. This was an incredible event that happened, and it's in several Mark and Matthew, and it talks about when Jesus had this special event that happened, and two other dead Jewish people were shown alive. So let's get right into it. Mark chapter 9. Good morning. I'm Pastor Rini. Welcome to 747 Morning Inspiration. Hey, keep on liking these videos and sharing them with your friends so we can go through the Bible together in a year and learn about how God's plan for humanity can change our lives forever. So, Mark chapter 9, starting in verse 2. After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up on a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them. His clothes became radiant. His clothes became radiant. There's my radiant clothes. Intensely white, as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, and they were talking with Jesus. And Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good that we are here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah." For he did not know what to say, for he was terrified. Let's just start there. Don't you love how the Apostle Peter speaks his mind? You know, he says what other people are just thinking. So all of a sudden, here's this guy you're following, Jesus, and he is glorified, showed in his glorified body, radiant with brilliant light and clothes that are lit up like they could never be lit up or bleached by man. But he's standing with Moses and Elijah, and they are talking to Jesus. They are talking with Jesus. Now, I want you to notice something. This is very important. Elijah and Moses are not talking with the disciples. They are talking to Jesus, which is a very important point not to miss. And why would this even happen at all? Remember that Moses was the most prominent leader of the Old Testament, and he represented the law, right? The Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible. Moses represents the father of the law. Elijah, the most prominent prophet, was considered the premier prophet of the Old Testament, and Elijah was taken up into the heavens with a chariot of fire. He did not die as far as people could see. And by the way, no one saw Moses die either. He went up on a mountaintop and died alone. So these two men that disappeared are now reappearing with Jesus, and Jesus, they're speaking with Jesus. Now, it says that, of course, they were terrified. The disciples, Peter, James, and John, were terrified at this sight. And it says, "And a cloud overshadowed them, and a voice came out of the cloud." So they're seeing this thing. They're terrified. Peter says, we better make 3 tents to honor these 3 saints, Moses, Elijah, and Jesus. And suddenly, looking around, they no longer saw anyone with them but Jesus only. So all of a sudden, everybody disappears except for Jesus. And only Jesus remains with them on the mountaintop. And he says in verse 9, as they were coming down the mountain, he charged them, Jesus charged the disciples, to tell no one what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So they kept the matter to themselves, questioning what the rising from the dead might mean. And they asked him, why do the scribes say that Elijah must come? That first Elijah must come. And I want to kind of go into this. Remember that Elijah wasn't seen to have died like everybody else did. He was seen being carried into the heavens on a chariot of fire. And Malachi 4, 5, and 6 gives a prophecy, and it says, "Behold, I will send you Elijah, the prophet, before the great and awesome day of the Lord, and he will turn the hearts of fathers to their children, and the hearts of children to their fathers." So there is this Old Testament prophecy that Elijah will return before the Messiah comes. And so Jesus wants to respond to this question, and he gives them the answer. He says, verse 12, "Elijah does come first to restore all things, and how it is written of the Son of Man that he should suffer many things and be treated with contempt. But I tell you that Elijah has come, and they did to him whatever they pleased, as it is written of him." So Jesus was making the reference to John the Baptist, because the people called John the Baptist the Elijah who had come, the Elijah who had been prophesied about. And so Jesus said that spirit of Elijah came, it was on John the Baptist, and they treated him poorly. They killed him, just like they will kill the Son of Man, except the Son of Man will rise up from the dead. But the question is also brought up, and it's a legitimate question, is, well, why is God showing the disciples talking to the dead? That is a death penalty as of the Old Testament. For instance, Isaiah says, "Let no one be found among you who practices divination or sorcery, interprets omens, engages in witchcraft, or casts a spell, who is a medium or spiritist, who consults the dead. Anyone who does such things is detestable to the Lord. And because of these same detestable practices, the Lord your God will drive out those nations before you. You must be blameless before the Lord your God." So they're not allowed to talk to the dead. And King Saul, remember when he lost his kingdom and Samuel the prophet died, King Saul went and got a sorcerer, a divinator, a seer, and summoned up supposedly the spirit of Samuel, who told him, "You blew it, dude. Your kingdom is over." So if there's a death penalty against talking to the dead, how could the dead be shown? And the simple answer is, if you read that passage, Elijah and Moses weren't talking to the disciples. The vision was they were talking to Jesus. And Matthew gives a little bit more of the story. And Matthew says, in Matthew 17:9, Jesus told the disciples, "Tell no one of this vision." So what they were seeing was a vision, a portal into the resurrected Jesus, and a portal into the heavens where the saints are alive again in the presence of the living God. And so the portal of the living that they saw is not that God raised them up here on earth and they were talking to the disciples. They never spoke to the disciples. In the vision, Elijah and Moses, the leader of the law and of the prophets, was speaking to the Messiah, and then they disappeared in the vision, and only Jesus was left. So it was this whole thing was about them realizing there is only one. The transfigured Christ means that there is one, the Son of God, Jesus' Son, the Messiah, the Redeemer, that the other ones in heaven will be risen, but they did not come back to earth. They didn't conjure their bodies back, and they weren't speaking with the disciples. It was simply a vision, as Matthew puts it. So that means it's not okay, by the way, to go see a diviner or a psychic or someone who plays on a Ouija board and talks to the dead. We're not allowed to that's the occult. That is something we're not allowed to do. But Jesus is the one who rose from the dead to show that he was the true Messiah, and he did show himself to us because he was God in the flesh. So the singular person that could come back from the dead, the only person that came back to earth from the dead, was Jesus himself, because he was God in the flesh, and he had the authority and power over life and death. So any other spirit that you see that you think's a person that came from the dead is exactly that, a spirit, a false spirit, a lying demon. This whole transfiguration had a singular purpose: to let Peter, James, and John know that God had chosen Jesus, and that Jesus was going to be the one who answers the prophecies of the Old Testament, and Jesus was going to die and come back and show himself as the transfigured Christ in his heavenly body. The transfiguration was God's reminder not to worship man, but to worship God. And to worship Jesus is to worship God, because Jesus was God in the flesh. He was God's Son. Though he was born of a woman, he carried the fullness of the deity within his body. That is the only time you worship what was once dead, because God can never die. So in reality, though the flesh of Jesus died, the spirit of Jesus never died, and he resurrected again in a transfigured body, so you still aren't worshiping the dead. You are worshiping God, who had come in the flesh and then proven he had the power over life and death when he gave his life on the cross for all humanity. It kind of blows your mind a bit, but it does set a few things in order. A cult is bad. Asking someone to summon up dead people is bad. You will only be summoning up demons. You will summon demons and liars and deceptive spirits. And you will do a dishonorable thing before the Lord. Don't play games with psychics. Don't play games with the occult. You only worship God. And you worship God's Son, Jesus, who came, all man, all God, in the flesh, without sin, died for all humanity, shed his blood as the final sacrifice for our sins to redeem us once and forever, and to give us the power and authority to live for him. Well, I hope that helps you today. If you did, hit the like button, share this with a friend, and remember, Jesus is Lord. See you tomorrow morning at... There it is, 7:47. Love you all. See you then.